First off, kudos to Mark and the crew here for inviting us. This place has always seemed to me like some kind of dream. Like, I'd always imagined what it would be like if there was this amazing store that existed, not just in St. Louis, that existed where all manner of saxophones and saxophone gear and mouthpieces and reeds and knowledgeable, nice people actually, that there was such a place somewhere on the planet. And then, lo and behold, here it is, right in St. Louis. So, round of applause for Mark and the gang for keeping this place up and running. It's really remarkable. And I love to spend money here. Thank you for coming along to join us on this Saturday. We'll play maybe for an hour or so, and I'll be happy to take questions, and we'll see what direction things want to go at that point. So, Ken, over to you. a Steve Swallow composition entitled Eiderdown that first was recorded back in the 1960s. And we'd like to continue with a piece by the great composer Thad Jones. This is a tune that I recently rediscovered and I've kind of fallen in love with, called Kids or Pretty People. piece, which is one of his originals. I'll cue up here.
This is a piece called Minuet, and it maybe has some vague connection to the classical minuet in terms of its form, but it's actually a choral, which is a Brazilian dance form, in 3/4. It kind of goes on. An epic.
Okay, I'll do two. I'll do two.
Okay. I'll do 6.
Okay. next piece is a standard from a Broadway musical. This particular tune comes from Frank Lesser's Guys and Dolls, done, I think it's a ballad, right? Or not.
Yeah.
And
Sarah.
we're going to have a slightly different bent on this one. I've never been in love before. Actually, I'll get rid of this. also a standard. Kim, you want to introduce this? Kim picked this tune.
This is a Rodgers and Hart tune, a beautiful ballad from a show called Pal Joey and called Bewitched. Just a standard that I really like. It's pretty. And I'm going to do the verse too.
to do an original of mine, which is a dedication to one of my all-time favorite musicians, who is thankfully still with us, Lee Konitz, the great alto player, who he's in his mid-80s, and I think still performing, if not late 80s. One of the great individualistic jazz musicians, and one of these guys who has a clean slate when it comes to improvising. No licks, no isms. One note follows the next. Very inspiring. And I wrote this tune. It's a contrafact, meaning pre-existing set of chord changes. In this particular case, the chord changes are those in Lee's key, by the way, which is E flat, not F, where it's normally done, to the tune Getting Sentimental Over You. So I wrote this contrafact, and so Kim and I will take it various places, and we'll see you at the end.
We hope.
We hope. Remember where we come in at the end?
I think so. We'll do something.
Wait a second. We're going to continue with another original of mine, and this one was actually written to be sung, and has been, by Debbie Lennon. Going back about 4 years, got very involved for the first time in writing lyrics, words and music for original compositions, and this comes out of that. This tune is maybe a year old as soon as I find it. I know it's here. And here it is. It's entitled Muse, and it comes with a little background, which I'll try to explain. I was sort of contemplating the relationship between the artist, in this particular case, Lester Young, the great inspiring tenor player, and the relationship with his muse and the various states of immediacy and distance at various parts of his career, as I was imagining. And I've tried to, I will actually read the lyrics to this because it might create even more of a context. The thing is in three pieces, three segments, each of which is some kind of adaptation of the 12-bar blues form. And let me just read you the lyrics, and hopefully this will create a mood. So the part one. When easy is as easy does, she is the song, and you're the dance, and swinging is a sweet hello, and melody the perfumed air. And what are blues but eager eyes, as haunting as a wishing moon? And part two. If what you claim is seldom yours, and memory is sly, I'll gather threads of angel hair along the gentle slope of night and play to what the wind holds dear, the easy swirl of mist and smoke. And then the last part. To be as empty as a bell, an echo in a piper's dream, an answer never given to a question never asked. If her time is welcome, waiting when my quiet song is through. So here is Muse. on to any questions that you might have, and saxophone related or otherwise. Anyway, this is a Chick Corea composition, his dedication to the grandmaster of bop piano, the guy who set it all in motion, Bud Powell, and that's the title of the tune. So, any questions at all related to anything we've done? Saxophone, improvisation, no sports questions, but anything else? Yes, sir.
Where did you learn?
Where did I learn? Well, starting off, I learned in the living room of my parents' house when I was in high school, long ago, listening to actually archival jazz recordings. My bonding with the music was initially through 1920s recordings of people like King Oliver and Jelly Roll Morton and Louis Armstrong. And with not even the ability to spell chords correctly or anything, I used to come home every day from school. Well, actually, this goes back to like 7th grade, 8th grade, and would sit around and play along with these recordings and try to figure out clarinet parts and so forth. I did not play saxophone back then. And actually, all the formal training that I've had as an instrumentalist was on clarinet. I've never really studied the saxophone for any intensive period of time with an individual where it was like you show up once a week and you get lessons. I was a clarinet major in college most of the time, which was Indiana U, but I was fortunate enough when I went there that there was this great teacher named David Baker. This was in the late 60s, and this was at a time when there weren't very many organized jazz improv teachers. And I was fortunate enough to fall under his wing, and he really showed me how to organize material and so forth. And then I just sort of took that and ran with it. Over time, I'm somebody who has really learned how to get things done in the practice room. More than what's even healthy for me, I'm sort of a closet case in that I'm somebody who is hard to pry me out of the practice room, frankly. I probably should perform more than I do, but I've devoted most of my professional life to teaching, actually. But, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
When did you start getting into composition? And you do such a great job of encapsulating the mood, like you hear Bud Powell, you can hear the Luke Combs. Is that just a ton of listening, or have you?
Well, yeah, like all of us who listen a lot, the stuff that at your core you relate to, you absorb, and you're curious enough about it to pursue it. As far as composition goes, I'm just a newbie at that. I mean, I started in a big way writing on a regular basis when a guitarist named Dave Black, who probably a lot of you know, he and I co-led a band called Brilliant Corners back in the 90s. That was all original music, and that was the first time when I was really writing a lot of music on a regular basis, most of which was poorly written and too hard to play, but I think that's where a lot of people start. But over time, I've kept at it in fits and starts. There have been times where I've written a lot. Right now, I'm not writing at all. But it's again, I'm just essentially self-taught at that. I've never really studied composition with anybody. And it probably shows. I'm sure Kim can testify, but I mean, I'm fascinated by it, and I really, a lot of times, if there's a sound that I really am curious about and would like to incorporate it into my own playing improvisationally, the first place it shows up is in a tune that I've written, because of course you can slow the process down and you can really focus on the individual sound and manipulate it in such a way that it's useful to you as a tune that then you can practice improvising over. So, but that's very common, I think, for most people who write material to be used in improvisation. But at any rate, we'll see what happens with how much more, if I'll sort of get back on the horse and start writing again, but right now I'm not writing at all. Unlike Kim, who writes every day, right? Want to talk about that?
Well, most days that I can, during the school year, I don't get a chance to. I'm not sure what to say about it exactly. The one thing that I found is that, and I tell this to my students too, that rather than writing yourself out, people think, well, if I write too much, I'll write myself out. I think if you don't write, there'll be more of a tendency not to have any ideas. If you are able to write on a regular basis, creativity is like a muscle that you exercise, and the more you exercise it, the more ideas that you have, and the process gets easier rather than harder. That's been my experience. Not that there aren't tough days, there certainly are.
You find that composing helps your improvisation as well? Or are they kind of more separate?
I hope that it helps it. I think I tend, on my best days, I try to think compositionally when I am playing. Well, actually, you're really not supposed to think about anything when you play. It was just play. But if I were to be conscious about what I'm doing, I would like that my solos go somewhere and develop. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes that doesn't. Hopefully, if I've been writing a lot, then again the juices are flowing, and that will help my improvisation too. But I'm sort of the opposite of Paul. I'm somebody who's in the practice room only when I have to be, like before concerts like this. I'll be in the writing room as often as I can, but in terms of practicing the instrument, I don't do that nearly enough, and I don't teach piano. That's not something that I do. So I wish I did.
An adjunct to all of that is that one thing that has really helped, I think, the choices that I make as an improviser is the fact that in the last 4 years, because I've really devoted a lot of time to reading a lot of poetry and writing lyrics. I've actually formed a sextet that features this wonderful vocalist, Debbie Lennon, who maybe a lot of you know, writing original material, and have gotten a lot of support from that group. But the process of actually using words in a musical context for me is such a refined and intense experience writing it that if I do a lot of it, if I'm kind of on the horse doing that then when I improvise, the choices that I make as an improviser seem so much more important somehow, where the focal point is really sharp if I've been working with words a lot, because it's just like, well, I'm just not going to waste anything as an improviser. I mean, if I were going to, as an old person, I can get on a soapbox or grandstand a little bit and make some judgments about certain things that I hear in jazz culture. And I guess the thing that I find is the problem that I hear most frequently among contemporary improvisers is that it's easy to sound mechanical. And I think that there's so many missed opportunities in terms of, like I listen to these recordings by these amazing young virtuoso players, people who I could not touch instrumentally at all. But as they play oftentimes, I'm always asking myself the question, well, why can't they nuance the phrases a little more? Things can sound mechanical. I mean, there are lots of people who sound very, very expressive. It almost analogously seems to me like it would be the equivalent of like getting on an interstate and driving like 80 or 90 miles an hour with your black glasses on, and you've got the stereo turned up as loud as you can, and meanwhile there are all these wildflowers that are out on either side of the road that you're just streaming past, and you're missing like this wonderful environment that you could take part of. It's part of your scene, so why not just slow down and pull over to one side and examine what's really there? Well, to me, just because you've got some chops doesn't mean that you have to utilize them all the time. And I think one of the hardest things to do is to allow the music to tell you what it wants rather than you to tell the music what you think, where you think it should go. I sort of try to stand by that when I can. Yes, Rich.
For both of you, what advice would you give to students who are thinking of entering music school?
Well, you're gonna lay that on me.
Yeah, man. I gotta think.
Well, the first thing would be make sure it's something you really love to do. Parents inevitably will ask me, well, can my child make a living at this? And I always say there are no guarantees. But if you are passionate about something, and committed to something, you're more apt to be successful at that than if not. So the first thing is to make sure that this is something you really love and something you want to do. Can you add a little more depth to that question, like in terms of specifics? Or, yeah. Well, I mean,
Well, I concur with Paul's comment about soloing, especially by some younger artists.
sure.
And a good music school, good teachers can say stop and look at the flowers on either side of the highway. I mean, it's maybe it comes with more maturity, but we get submissions all the time of young artists, and their compositions are running 30-second note scales. It's I've said to so many of them, I want to wake up in the morning with a melody in my mind that's planted there. That's
Well, the one thing that I do notice about students, and have noticed this for a while, is that they do not know the Great American Songbook, or many of them. If I have any melodic sense at all, it's due to the fact that as a youngster, I was exposed to this music. I mean, it's not really the music of my generation either, it's my mother's generation. But she would bring home records from the library. She had a nice sort of operetta-like voice, and she would sing around the house. And so I was exposed to this very early. And I remember seeing, the Jolson story on TV and being intrigued with that. He certainly wasn't politically correct, but my parents gave me a 2-record set of him singing, and it was all these tunes by Irving Berlin and George Gershwin. And so I was this little kid singing Jolson tunes. I was kind of a weird little kid. So this lyrical aspect is in me, and I think that that would help tremendously to develop that sense, so that you're not just running notes, but that you're actually trying to make a melodic statement. But if you don't know what a melody is, then you're not going to be able to create it. I think that this is a gross generalization, but generally in terms of current pop music, melody itself is not that highly valued. There are other things that are more important in that music than melody as I know it and understand it and love it. So one thing that I try to do is impart to my students a sense of melody and expose them to the treasures that are in the American Songbook. And I realize, that was several generations ago. It's not the music of now, but at least so far, that music has lasted. There's something in it. So that would be one thing. I think the other thing that we do in music schools is teach craft, whether it's technique on the saxophone or compositional craft. There's a great book that I wish I'd read when I was a fledgling college student. It's by Malcolm Gladwell. You know this author, and the book is called Outliers. And the book is about how successful people become successful. And they look at musicians, and they look at Bill Gates and people like that. And there are certain things that are out of their control. But one thing that is common to all of them is 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours of practicing their instrument, or being at a computer, or whatever it is that they did. Now, I've only had 9,999.5 hours, so therefore I haven't, made it to the pinnacle. So, that to me is a very inspiring thing, actually. It could be discouraging if you hear that, but for somebody who's a college-age student to say, listen, they did some studies of people who are equally talented musically. I don't know how you determine that exactly. And they followed them through. And whereas some of them became, music teachers, others of them became, Joshua Bell playing the violin, the symphony orchestras around the world. The one thing that was different about those who made it to the top was not talent. It was work. It was how many hours they put in. And so I wish I had known that, because I would have put the more time in. So those are some things that I would want students to be aware of when they come in. If they want to major in jazz, especially, or anything in music. That's your question, Rich?
Oh, yes, very well.
Yeah. Music is a thing that is so huge that if you do the work, as Kim was just stating, if you really log the time and essentially devote your life to it, it will give you what you asked for. So, and for instance, I mean, it could be that your relationship to music is one that essentially involves physical control of an instrument, where you have this amazing dexterity, and it's more of a kinetic activity. And music can certainly give you that. Music can also, and I mean, the world is full of entertainers who have talent and have done the work where music has given them money. It's outside the realm of jazz, and for the most part, but it can. I mean, quite seriously, the people whose music pervades our culture, for better or for worse, have made a lot of money doing it, and they asked for money from music. They really did. That was a goal, and so I think it's really important that you ask the question that is best for you. For some people, music is a process for discovering things about themselves. The thing that the musicians I am most drawn to are the ones that sound emotionally complex, and the ones I'm least interested in are the ones that sound, I'm not going to say psychotic, but they are essentially just single-minded. I mean, you're hearing one, they always go to one place. And that's again my argument about so much contemporary jazz that I hear. It's like, well, human beings are more complicated than this. I mean, music can be this incredible structural thing where you can get lost in it, where it's a form of architecture or a form of mathematics, if you will. You've all heard that cliche. But it can also be a process of discovering parts of yourself that you enjoy finding, and at times discovering parts of yourself that you wish you hadn't discovered. It can be a very transformative process. So to answer your question, Rich, I think if somebody comes to me and says, well, can I major in music? I think that it's a great thing to do if you are willing to go the distance with it and ask the right questions of it, so that it becomes a positively transformative experience in your own life. It's never easy. I mean, it's a difficult way to make a living, but there are some people who would just much rather do that than go sit in the cubicle somewhere and type on a computer. That they just have it in their blood. I remember years ago, Lou Tabakin, one of the great living tenor players, we had him over at school at Webster University, where Kim and I teach, and he said, if you have to make an intellectual decision about staying in music, you're in the wrong business. In other words, he felt that the decision was essentially emotional, that it's something that it becomes something that consumes you, and you're rather driven to play. I mean, the people that I know who have really hung in there, whether they're working or not, they're practicing and writing for the most part. And it can be a great lifestyle. It can absolutely be a great lifestyle. Very healthy. Again, if you ask the right things of it as a process. But it's not for everybody. That's for damn sure. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, Derek.
I guess this is for both of you. Just back to composing. Whenever you're working on something, do you try and find a melody first, or do you get a set chord changes and work 4x4 bars?
I mentioned I am so melody driven that tends to be where I start. But for different people, it'll start different ways. It might start with a rhythm. It might start with a chord. I tend to start with melody. Not always, but mostly. I mean, inspiration when it comes is about, at least for me, about this much. And then the rest is trying to figure out where this idea is going to take.
That goes for anything, like whenever you're writing jazz or.
Yeah, I mean, writing is writing. Whether I'm writing for an orchestra or, you know, everything's written out, or if I'm writing for a big band or I'm just writing a tune.
And for those of you who don't know, Kim is the director of composition at Webster University. So he's written in every idiom. I mean, he has written for full orchestras and concertos and string quartets, and he's written like a full library for big band, for his slightly reduced size big band. So he's speaking, this is the voice of experience you're hearing here.
Yeah. So it almost doesn't matter where you start, really. I should a longer answer for that, but I don't know. Yeah.
Just say start.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is to start and to show up as often as you can, and to finish it, whatever it is. And not to worry if it's the greatest thing since Mozart or a piece of Dreck. It doesn't matter, because everything will be beneficial. Everything you write exercises the muscle. So the important thing is to write. If you write enough, and you know, obviously, I mean, you listen to music, play music, you've studied music, there's a lot of stuff in your head. I mean, if you write enough, at some point you're going to come up with something that you're satisfied, that you like. And the other thing about an aspect is craft. You know, that can help you know, give you some techniques to develop ideas if you're stuck. So the main thing I tell all my students is to do it. That's at least half the battle, maybe more.
Yeah, from my perspective, if I'm writing instrumental music, and most of the time, everything that I write essentially is written with specific musicians in mind, and the pieces are meant to be improvised over in most instances. And when I will, as with Kim, I will start with a melody. A lot of times I will write a melody and then tonicize it with a bass line, not really thinking too consciously about chords, and then the chords become a coloristic aspect. One of the things that has kind of derailed me a bit is that when I started really thinking a lot about lyrics, well, I would write that first, and that creates an emotional context, a mood that needs to be expressed through the music, and that is a different place to start for me. And so everything follows that.
Yeah, I always find that to be helpful. If I'm dealing with a text, that's great, because man, I really like setting text, though I don't write my own like Paul. Because first of all, there's a beginning and an end. The text is only so long, so that's good. And the other thing, as Paul says, that the text suggests a mood. So maybe then I may start with the melody, or I may try and find a harmony that evokes that mood. Because I think, to me, harmony is sort of a modifier. It does really suggest the mood, maybe even more so than a melody at times. And then, of course, if I'm dealing with text, I also am paying attention to the declamation of the text. You know, how is it spoken? How would it be said? I want it to sound natural when it's sung. So I'll think about those issues as well. So actually, text, if you like, you know, poetry, that can be helpful too. I also find that sometimes the music that I write, that when I'm setting a text, is actually seems more substantive to me than the music that I write that is just instrumental. Because sometimes if the text obviously has layers to it, that allows me to go deeper too. I'm not sure what that says. I'm shallow or what, but I found that to be true.
One of the great motivators to write is to sign your name on the dotted line first. In other words, I'm going to do this concert of original music on such and such a date, and then that really gives you a reason to write.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing like a deadline or a commission, if you're lucky enough to get a commission, anything like that, where you have to produce. I find if I don't have a deadline, and I don't have anything in particular. I'll probably still write, but a lot of what I write then is not all that great. I think it's always better. And nowadays, I don't want to write something I'm not going to hear. I want to hear, I mean, live, not on finale. That's a very poor substitute for live acoustic music, and that's primarily what I write. I don't really write electronics. I have nothing against it. It's just not for me. It doesn't speak to me personally. So I find, having a concert is a great motivator. Because if you write music and it's never played, then you've only done half the process. Because the other part is having it played. I feel like, ideally, that I give a gift to the performer and they give a gift back to me. And then hopefully that's a gift for the listener too, as opposed to a curse or something like that.
Yes, somebody else had a hand up.
I
Yes.
did. I'm a high school math teacher, and kids or people will tell me that they want to grow up and be a high school teacher, and cringe inside, or career choice. My son wants to grow up and he's going to do music one way or the other, but he wants to be a jazz studies professor. So, do you cringe when you hear that, or is that a good choice?
Well, again, it's the answer. I think I can speak for Kim, but it's what we said before. If the person is truly motivated to do it,
Then it's a great choice.
well, I don't know if it's a great choice, but it's a viable choice. You can take any profession a long way if you're truly committed to it, and all of us we discover along the way how truly committed we really are. So I mean, that's tough to say. God knows we need really good educators at every level. We need them, people who are really deeply involved in music and want to share it. Boy, that's something that we, as a culture, we really, really, really need.
He should make sure that he really develops himself as a musician. Too. I think I cannot complain about how things have worked out. But I kind of let things happen the way they happen. But I think I might have wanted to spend more time in the world just learning my craft and getting kicked around a little bit. And that might have stretched my abilities, what I can do. But, well, yeah. I'll end there.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. The thing I find very good, I see young musicians that want to get into jazz. Now, the jazz group that you have there at Webster, do those students really know all the standards as far as the music's concerned? I was just curious when you were talking about.
Not yet.
Not yet. Is that right? That's unfortunate.
I don't know all the standards. But I mean, it's one thing that we emphasize. The problem with school is not always the best place to learn something, because there are so many different classes you have to take. Your attention is divided in a lot of different things. So there's no way to do everything in school. We basically start the process. I don't know how many students actually master their instruments in the 4 years that they're in school, or learn all the standards. We give them a push, and then it's going to be up to them to pursue it.
I think as somebody who teaches improvisation, not just to saxophone players, I do teach people who want to learn how to improvise on the saxophone, so it involves the technique of the saxophone and the discipline of learning to improvise. But I teach a lot of non-saxophonists private lessons in improvisation. And I think what I'm really giving them, I'm showing them how to input the information in a clear way that's useful to them. That's my gift to them. In other words, that's the battle. If you really know how to practice well, how to organize the material and input the information so thoroughly with such clarity that it becomes a part of your of your musical being, where it's working on every level. It's working analytically, where you know what kind of chord it is and what inversion or whatever, that you know it orally, that the sound conjures up a gesture that sits within the total knowledge that you have to the whole legacy of jazz. Kinetically, I mean, that you can get around an instrument. Structurally, what creates drama. I mean, all these things, if you can really show them how to input the information where it will essentially sink into their bones and then start to become part of the melody that sings autonomously in their head when they improvise. I feel that's my goal. I feel that my job is to show them how to practice, essentially. Because all of us are lifelong learners, and anybody who has both hands in this, you're always trying to input information more thoroughly so that it becomes more effortlessly useful to you. And that's it. And of course, I mean, students are so impressionable. You never know. On one hand, they may be getting some of that, but there's things that they may get from you that you have no sense that you're giving them, or they may be repulsed by things about you that you have no sense that you're repulsing them by, and you're having an effect on these people, whether you know it or not, if you have regular access to them. But hopefully, that at least you can see progress in terms of how they go about learning the information on their own. I'm the least interested in creating automatons musically. I'm more interested in people who can problem solve on their own, but they at least know what the territory looks like and how to work comfortably within it. So,
Zach, do you have a question? You didn't raise-
say what?
Can I ask one more
Sure.
question? It's a simple question. I have a tenor sax I have since 1953. Now, I played for a while, never with a group or whatever, but now in my old age now, I want to get back into it. And the question I have on the reeds, I noticed that there'll be maybe 4 or 5 minutes where you haven't played the tenor or the alto or the other instrument there. How do you keep it moist?
Well,
That you can, boom, you can start playing again.
well, I mean, sometimes that is a problem if an instrument sits for a long, long time, for an hour, and then you pick it up.
That's
But for the most part, if the reed is not brand new, that they retain moisture. I mean, Mark and his staff here all are much more informed about that. There are people who submerge reeds all the time. That's their. You want to speak to that?
Well, I think the key is when you look at his horns up there, and they all have mouthpieces. And that on a gig when you're switching between instruments, that's saved you. If that mouthpiece cap wasn't on there, you probably would scoop the thing on. So, I mean, do your best to keep it as moist as you can. And the whole breaking in reed process is important too, to have a good reed that you know is functional.
How old is your?
How old?
The tenor.
The tenor. This is like 1959, Mark 6. Other question?
Yeah, kind of adding something on when you guys were talking about melody and chords and stuff like that. I remember 4 or 5 years ago when we were starting that project with those guys who were talking about how you were consciously trying to play things in different time signatures. Can you talk a little bit about that or what?
Well, I was certainly thinking about that and have a little bit. Just to create a context here, if you listen to much jazz, the majority of music that's being recorded by young musicians who are in New York and the major cities of Europe and elsewhere who are under the age of 40 is not in 4/4 and it's not in 3/4. It's all in odd meters. Standards played in 7 or 11, it's new currency. And that's not something, at this point in my life, it doesn't come real easy for me. And it's, as an improviser, it's something that this time around, I guess I'm just not going to get it, because I just don't have the time to put into doing it. And I'm not always in a context or an environment where I'm asked to do that anyway. I'm not going to say that it's something that I shouldn't learn. I should, but I'm just not going to put the time in. But to answer your question about writing, yeah, I was interested in doing that, and still am, but I don't have a lot of insight about it. I really don't. A lot of times, if I do write in odd meters, it comes from an ostinato, meaning a repetitive bass line or something that is in some odd combination of, or a mixed combination of meters that that's a place to start for me. But I don't have a lot of insight into that. Maybe Kim does.
Not a ton. Probably to some extent, Paul's a brother. I have, written in some odd meters here and there. And I've got a piece in mind that's in 17. But I just haven't, honestly, but I haven't worked it out. But the thing about odd meters is that if I'm writing in it, the one thing I strive for is that it somehow feel natural. And that could be an awkward thing to do. It can be done. And especially, again, as players are much more comfortable, young players are more comfortable with odd meters and things like that, it'll sound natural. It's natural to them. Well, do you guys know Joel Cruz? Yeah, Joel. Current. One of our former students who, it just was very natural for him to write in unusual meters. Natural for him to play and natural for him to write in it. And it was really interesting to have lessons with him. I learned a lot in my lessons teaching Joel with all these meters, because it was totally natural for him.
Well, in a way, it's like I represent a generation, as somebody who really started getting serious about this in the 60s, late 60s, went to college in the late 60s, early 70s, that what seemed so natural for me to do was to deal with modal settings, where meaning playing over one tonal center and coloring it in a lot of different ways. It was just part of the air. It was everybody around me who was my age was also doing this. And this was something that was very foreign to the generation, one generation older than me, the bebop guys. They were kind of locked in this harmonic rhythm where the chords would occur every 2 measures, and they thought that way, and they could play beautifully within that context, but you put them in a modal setting, and they didn't know what to do with the freedom. Well, similarly, I feel that the generation today, where they're so effortless in their ability to deal in odd meters, that I am a generation who, for whatever reason, is just very difficult. And I think I'm not alone in this. When I talk to people who are my age, a lot of us feel similarly at C, like where you're counting, you're having to count on the bandstand, which is terrible. I think it's partially a cultural thing. I think it's the zeitgeist, it's like this idea of combining meters, multiples of 4s and 3s, and it's just a natural thing for younger musicians because of the environment that they have grown up in musically.
So I guess that might beg the question, is like, if something is new like that, do we have an obligation to learn it? And I think that the main obligation that we have is to be ourselves and to do what is natural for us and most expressive for us. And if I'm curious what your take on this. So I don't know that we have an obligation to do that necessarily. I think if it affects, if we listen to it and think, wow, that's incredible, I love that, I want to be a part of that, then it would be natural for us to take the time to do it.
Well, the dumb answer is that the answer to everything in music is yes.
Yeah.
Should I practice in odd meters? Oh, absolutely. Should I continue playing C major? Yeah, you should definitely continue playing C major. And major scales and thirds? Absolutely. Should I work on Egyptian music? Yeah, absolutely. You should do that. But do I have time to do that? And how does that impact all the other responsibilities that I have? So, if I were 25 years old, I would feel a definite need at this point in my life to learn to do that very facilely. As somebody close to traditional retirement age, maybe not. I'm just trying to keep all the nuts and bolts, tied down and make sure that everything doesn't, the wheels don't come off at this point.
That's interesting because the young players coming up do have an obligation to learn,
Well, if they're gonna work.
bebop, to learn modal, and now
Oh,
they're
yeah.
learning playing all times. So
Yeah.
does that mean it's getting more and more difficult to be a musician?
Well, I mean, doesn't it make sense? I mean, the amount of information that we all have to deal with just increases, so,
Right.
is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm just wondering if there's a point at which what you learn starts to drop off, or does it just continue to get bigger and bigger? You know what I mean?
Oh, well, I mean, what's your answer to that? Aside from music, you have a PhD in science, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's to learn it all, but I just don't know if that's how feasible that is.
Yeah, well-
As an educator, how you approach that?
Okay.
Well, I actually don't know it all, so I can't teach it all. I mean, I do feel like there's much more that I want to learn, and hopefully I will. I mean, the problem, as Paul says, is time.
And I guess there's a lot from the 20s that we don't do. We off
Yeah.
and kind
Yeah.
of drop off what isn't necessary, or
Yeah, I mean, to me, again, it's, each of us carries with us as teachers the sum total of all the experiences that we've had. And that includes, in my case, since you brought up the 1920s, I have done an inordinate amount of listening and have been shaped by the musical values of the 1920s in no small way. I mean, that's a lot of the music that I still listen to, even if I don't perform it very well. But the musical values in question have really shaped me. And that's something that I can give to students. Ideally speaking, should I learn whatever is absolutely cutting edge? Like, for instance, there's this guy, George Garzone, a saxophone player who is really at the edge of the known universe musically. They've developed, at Berkeley and Boston, there's a course that they teach called the Garzone Triad that has to do with being able to do very quick harmonic shifts using triadic structures, and he has a video out now. And looking at it, it's a lifetime's worth of work, I think, to be able to get to a place where you can improvise that way. And yet there are people who are taking that and running with it, who are devoting an enormous amount of time to trying to get the Garzone methodology together. Do I have the time to do that or the inclination to do it? I'm intrigued, but the amount of work in reference to my other responsibilities to teach, it doesn't seem practical to me. That's somebody else's job, I suppose. I really can't be everything to everybody. It would be nice. I mean, if I were much, much younger, like I said, if I was just starting in a college teaching career, I would absolutely be pursuing that because I would feel that was something I needed to know, just like the odd meter thing. So, yeah, we should try to know it all, I think. But ultimately, you start to recognize, I think the older you get, you start to recognize the value of what it is that you have to offer. And you make your peace with the fact that you can't show everybody everything, but there are certain things that you know very, very well that perhaps the knowledge of them and the way to communicate it is in short supply. And so maybe that's your value to some. And not everybody's ready to hear it or able to hear it, but some are, and that can be gratifying and hopefully useful.
He's smart, isn't he? Wow.
Yeah.
We'll take one more question and
Yeah.
wrap it up.
Well, in reference to the lifestyle musicians, you used the word healthy, and I was kind of curious if that was particularly meaningful, and if so, could you elaborate on what you meant by healthy?
Well, I can't remember the context in which I used it.
Well, it was like I read at the end of you sort of describing, like the idea of going to music school and like, being a musician.
Oh, being healthy.
Be a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, healthy. I think being a musician can be enormously fun and emotionally satisfying. I mean, there's nothing, more fun than having control. I mean, having control of an instrument physically and being able to in a collective with musicians in real time, be really, really present and trying to hear what's going on and to collectively create something, or at least moving the parts of the round of something that is is not new, but at least I'm not so presumptuous to say that I've never played anything new in my life. But as with all of us who just use speech all the time, we're always reshuffling the deck and communicating in a singular way, one to the other. Well, we're doing the same thing musically, but that can be enormously fun and enormously healthy. I'm a real process person. To me, I'm much more interested in jazz as a process than as a product. I like the process of learning to try to be more present in a performance, because that affects every part of my life outside of playing music. And to me, if that were the only thing that I got out of playing, it would be worth it. For me, I think that that's really, really healthy to try to, not be thinking about other things, but to really be in the moment, present, and just like in a good conversation with someone where you're really, really present. I think that that's a healthy thing to do. But health can be expressed in so many different ways. If you really want to be a useful, sustaining member of the jazz community or the teaching community or the musical community, you obviously have to maintain your health, both on a physical and on an emotional level. So it's a big adventure, but definitely worth doing if you have the taste for it. But we all have to discover that on our own as we go through all of this. So.
Well, I want to say once again, thank you,
Yeah.
Colin, and Kim will be around when you really have any more questions for them. But for the stimulating discussion and the great music